In the city of Orange, tucked in northern Orange County, California, lived 36-year-old Maribel Ramos. From the very beginning, Maribel had always been different. She was ambitious, determined, and endlessly compassionate. Friends admired her for her loyalty, and family members often relied on her for support. With her mother working 2 jobs to keep the household running, Maribel naturally stepped into a maternal role, guiding and protecting her siblings. Her childhood dream was clear. She wanted to work in law enforcement. Becoming a police officer was her ultimate goal. After finishing school, she began working as a security guard, but her ambitions didn't stop there. In August 2001, she made a life-changing decision. She joined the United States Army, hoping that service would open new doors and prepare her for a future in criminal justice. Just weeks later, on September 11, 2001, the world changed forever. News anchors broke into live broadcasts in shock as the first plane struck the World Trade Center. Moments later, the second plane hit, confirming the unthinkable. America was under attack. For Maribel, the tragedy carried an even deeper meaning. As a newly enlisted soldier, she would soon find herself on the front lines of a war that reshaped an entire generation. Deployed to Iraq, she served not 1, but 2 tours of duty. She rose to the rank of sergeant before being honorably discharged in 2008. But slowing down was never in her nature. After her military service, Maribel returned home and enrolled at California State University, Fullerton, to study criminal justice. She shared an apartment with her mother, and even as she adjusted back to civilian life, her focus never wavered. She was determined to use her education and military experience to secure a future with the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. In 2009, tragedy struck once again. Her mother, passed away. It was a devastating loss for the entire family, especially for Maribel, who had always been so close to her. With her mother gone, she decided to put out an ad on Craigslist, hoping to find a roommate who could help with expenses and share the home. That's when she met Kwang K.C. Joy, a 54-year-old man who had recently lost his parents and was searching for a fresh start. From the moment they spoke, Maribel felt comfortable with him. K.C. was quiet, polite, and respectful. He mostly kept to himself, and Maribel appreciated that balance. To her, it seemed like the perfect arrangement. K.C., in turn, came to see Maribel as family. He even began tutoring her niece in mathematics. They would share meals, spend time together, and he would later describe their relationship as that of siblings. By the summer of 2013, Maribel's life was full. She had started dating a man named Paul Lopez, and their relationship was blossoming. She had been invited to speak at a Chicago conference about transitioning from the military to civilian life, and she was preparing for her upcoming graduation ceremony. Her days were filled with plans: shopping trips with her niece Giselle, a hair appointment booked in advance, and endless dreams about what her next chapter would look like. Her sister Lucy remembered how excited Maribel was. Graduation, she said, wasn't just a milestone. It was a turning point. Maribel wanted to travel, spend more time with family and friends, settle down, and maybe even start thinking about children. After years of sacrifice, education, and responsibility, she was finally ready to live life for herself. But just days before her graduation, everything changed. On May 3, 2013, Casey reached out to Lucy with concern. He hadn't seen Maribel, and her car was still parked outside their apartment. He told Lucy that as far as he could tell, she hadn't gone to class. Lucy tried to ease his worry. Maybe she was taking a walk, maybe clearing her mind. Maribel loved hiking with her dog, and she often went on long walks. But KC remained unsettled. He picked up the phone and called police. "Orange Police Dispatcher," the voice on the line answered. "I have a roommate. She's 36 years old and she didn't come home last night," Casey said. The dispatcher asked if he wanted to file a missing persons report. Casey explained that her car was still in the lot. She hadn't answered his calls, and she had not been to school. A few hours later, Lucy got another call. Maribel had missed her weekly softball game. Even more troubling, she hadn't shown up for her on-campus job. To anyone else, It might not have seemed alarming, but for Maribel, this was a glaring red flag. She was meticulous about her time, always early and never irresponsible. Not showing up without a word was unimaginable. Lucy and a cousin rushed to Maribel's apartment. The car was still out front. The doors were locked, and there was no answer when they knocked. But inside, they could hear something that made their stomachs drop. Maribel's dog. Fear set in. They called police again, adding more urgency to the missing persons report KC had already made. Officers arrived at the apartment on East Rose Street. After knocking and waiting, they forced their way inside. Nothing seemed out of place. No signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, no broken locks. But when Lucy stepped into her sister's bedroom, she noticed something strange. The bed wasn't made. A pillowcase was missing. For anyone else, this might have been insignificant, but Lucy knew her sister. Maribel was disciplined, almost rigid in her routines. She never left her room unkempt. Detectives realized instantly that this wasn't just a case of someone running late. Something was wrong. They contacted the homicide unit for immediate assistance. While police searched the apartment, KC returned from a drive. He explained that the last time he saw Maribel, they had talked casually, nothing unusual. She seemed fine, he said. He remembered leaving the apartment, then returning around 9:00 p.m. to find her gone. He assumed Paul, her boyfriend, might have picked her up. But Paul hadn't. Her purse, her keys, her phone, even her bank cards, all of it was missing. Worse, her phone had been turned off, with no new activity. The last few calls she received had come from Paul. Investigators knew they had to speak with him right away. Within hours, Maribel's loved ones were mobilizing. Family and friends printed flyers, canvassed the community, and spoke to local media, begging for answers. A woman full of life on the edge of a bright new chapter had vanished without a trace. Lucy's voice trembled with certainty. There's no question there's something going on here. My sister's missing. And I know this isn't by choice. She's not the kind of person who would just walk away from her life. Yes, she's had challenges, but nothing that would ever make her disappear. Not depression, not self-harm, not running away. The worry was spreading fast. In Maribel Ramos's neighborhood, flyers were being handed out. Her photo, her description, and one critical detail. She was last seen Thursday night between 7:30 and 8:30 p.m. Family and friends went door to door posting the flyers wherever they could. They weren't willing to wait. Every passing hour felt heavier. Police had already declared the case suspicious. There were simply too many red flags. Her apartment complex had a fair number of cameras, but in the worst possible luck, most of them didn't cover the areas that mattered. None of them directly faced her unit. And since Maribel and her roommate KC often parked out on the street, the parking lot footage was next to useless. Still, there was one critical piece of video. In the manager's office sat a rent deposit box, and the cameras there had caught her. On May 2nd, just one day before she went missing, Maribel was recorded slipping her rent check inside. The image was haunting in hindsight. She wore pajama bottoms and a simple vest top. It was late, 8:30 p.m., and she looked as though she was winding down for the night. She walked back calmly toward her apartment. No one else was around, and that was the last time she was ever seen alive. Her family's voices filled the air in those early days, desperate and determined. We really need everyone's help. Please don't stop. Keep sharing her story. Keep looking. We have to find Maribel. At Calvary Church of Santa Ana, the community gathered for a vigil. Candles flickered as prayers echoed through the hall. Her loved ones held on to faith with everything they had. She's going to come home to us. We're going to hug her again. We believe it. We just need help. But alongside hope came fear. Some community members were undocumented, and they worried that speaking to police might put them in danger. Maribel's family begged them not to stay silent. If you're afraid to talk, you can stay anonymous, send an email, anything helps. Please, we just want her safe. Detectives pressed forward. They confirmed what her family already knew. Maribel's disappearance was no ordinary missing persons case. This was a woman who had served in South Korea and Iraq, an Army veteran, a paratrooper who had jumped from planes in service of her country. "She fought for us," her loved one said. "She risked everything for her family and for America, and now we have to fight for her." The Orange Police Department urged the public to come forward with any information. Flyers carried a phone number, 714-744-7403, and a website, findmaribel.com. Family members repeated their plea. "If you know something, anything at all, don't be afraid. Call. Even the smallest detail could matter." Detectives soon turned to the people closest to her, beginning with Paul Lopez, the man she had been dating. Paul was cooperative from the start. He admitted their relationship was still new, they weren't exclusive, and he even joked that it was a don't ask, don't tell situation. But he made one thing clear. Despite how casual things seemed, he cared for her. Investigators quickly narrowed down the timeline. The last confirmed sighting of Maribel was Thursday, May 2nd. Paul explained that he had been at work that entire day, from 4 p.m. to midnight, a fact his employer easily verified. He had spoken to her often on the phone, but he hadn't seen her in person. He let detectives search his truck, which was equipped with a GPS tracker. The data showed he had been nowhere near her apartment that night. He had nothing to hide and nothing to connect him to her disappearance. Paul was cleared, but before leaving the station, he offered one piece of information that stuck with detectives. He mentioned Maribel's roommate, KC. According to Paul, the once friendly relationship between Maribel and KC had soured. Their arguments were becoming frequent, most of them about money. KC was consistently late with rent, and his personal struggles were beginning to spill over into their shared home. Maribel was frustrated. Paul recalled a phone call from the very night Maribel was last seen. She had placed him on speakerphone, and he could hear the tension in the room. Maribel had finally told Casey she was done. Enough was enough. He needed to move out. She'd been warning him for weeks, but this time she gave him a deadline. He had to leave the very next day. Casey pushed back, saying he wanted 2 more weeks, but without paying in advance. That only fueled her anger. Paul remembered raising his voice on the call. "Casey, pack your stuff and get out. If you don't, I'll come over there and do it myself." He offered to drive over that night to help Maribel, but she declined. She insisted she could handle it. She wanted the argument over with, and she planned to go to bed. It was the last conversation Paul ever had with her. She always talked about him in frustration. Paul later explained. She complained that he never had his rent on time. She said his life was falling apart and it was spilling into hers. I could hear him in the background that night. She told him flat out, "Tomorrow he's out." Detectives made a note. If Casey had been ordered out of the apartment, that gave him motive. And then came another revelation. Less than 2 weeks before Maribel went missing, she herself had dialed 911. "We go to Ice Park all the time." He explained how he had tried to reach in and grab a fishing line, saying it was that line which had tangled around the duck and scratched his skin when he struggled to pull it off. The scratches were deep, straight, and eerily similar in size. Could they really have come from an animal, a plant, or maybe a sharp wire? Investigators weren't so sure. Still, he allowed them to photograph him, gave a DNA sample, even handed over his phone and laptop, and told them they could search both his car and his apartment. But when a cadaver dog alerted to the back of his car, suspicion grew darker. Inside his apartment, they found a pajama shirt stuffed away that matched the bottoms she had been wearing in the CCTV footage. On the sleeve was blood, confirmed to be Maribel's. No other D was present. On May 13th, as friends flooded the internet with missing posters and messages on every platform they could, Casey was still active online. On Yelp, where Maribel's face and name were being shared, he joined the threads himself. His profile picture was of him and Maribel together, and he began writing about his missing roommate. But something in his words unsettled people. He often spoke of her in the past tense, and strangers even warned him to be careful. It didn't look good. Some gave him the benefit of the doubt since English wasn't his first language. But to investigators, Casey was becoming the only person of interest. They quietly placed him under 24-hour surveillance. Casey, meanwhile, never shied away from the cameras. To reporters, he insisted Maribel was his best friend, his only family, and that he would never hurt her. He repeated that he had willingly given police his DNA, his laptop, his phone, even permission to search his home. But his voice betrayed unease. He admitted, "I'm the roommate everybody thinks had something to do with this, and it makes me uncomfortable." Reporters showed Maribel's apartment where she had last been seen 8 days earlier. Her car was still parked outside. Her beloved dog was left behind. No phone calls, no credit card activity, nothing. Her sister told the cameras she knew something was terribly wrong when Maribel missed a baseball game and then a Veterans Appreciation Night where she had been scheduled to give a speech. She was never the type to simply not show up. Police said 6 detectives were working the case, though no suspects had been named. The community rallied in full force. Family members, friends, and strangers creating flyers, websites, and email campaigns, reaching out to anyone who could help bring Maribel home. Her military service was highlighted. 2 tours in Iraq as an Army sergeant before being honorably discharged in 2008. To her loved ones, she was more than just a veteran. She was a sister, a cousin, an aunt, a student, and someone whose kindness had changed lives. Maribel Ramos stood 5'2", weighed about 130 pounds, with a small star tattooed on her left shoulder. Detectives knew time was running short. With his laptop confiscated, Casey spent hours on library computers. Staff told investigators that each session was wiped clean when users logged off, but detectives arranged to monitor his screen in real time. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Emails, social media checks, a job application. He returned often to Maribel's Facebook page, scrolling through posts about searches and vigils. But then, his searches turned darker. He typed, "How long does it take a human body to decay?" Moments later, he read posts about an awareness walk in a canyon Maribel had loved to hike. He typed the canyon's name into maps. At first, he zoomed into the hiking routes, but then he scrolled away, deeper into a remote area, far from any trails. Over and over, he zoomed in and out on the same spot, a lonely patch of land beside a road. Before Casey even left the library, detectives were already racing to the coordinates he had just studied. On May 17th, in that exact canyon area, officers discovered a shallow grave. Beneath a pile of rocks lay the badly decomposed body of Maribel Ramos. Heat and time had erased the cause of death, but one detail identified her immediately: the tattoo on her shoulder. When Casey was brought back in, he didn't know yet that she had been found. At first, he was calm, even talkative. But the moment detectives began pressing him harder, the mask slipped. He grew restless, stood up, and stormed out of the interview. A detective called after him, telling him they believed the answers were in his heart and that it was time to share them. That night, Casey Joy walked straight into the hands of police. He was arrested on suspicion of murder, and when officers searched him, they made a chilling discovery. Maribel Ramos's military identification tags were in his possession. For her family, who had been praying for a miracle, it was the ending they had feared the most. The body of the beloved Iraqi war veteran was found in a remote canyon. Her remains decomposed, hidden away until the smell of death gave her away. Investigators believe the final hours unfolded quietly, almost deceptively. On that Thursday night, after arguing with Casey about the rent, Maribel had called her boyfriend, Paul, placing the phone on speaker. Around 7:30 p.m., she dropped off the rent check, surveillance cameras capturing her final moments as she returned to the apartment just before 8:30. No signs of a struggle were found. Detectives concluded Casey had suffocated her in her sleep, pressing a pillow over her face before she could ever react. A trained paratrooper who had once survived combat, taken in silence in her own bed. From there, the plan was disturbingly methodical. He loaded her body into his car and drove to the canyon, tearing his arms on barbed wire as he dragged her to a hidden spot. He cleaned his vehicle afterward, even removing her pillowcase. Her belongings were never found, likely discarded along the way. Yet despite the evidence, Casey denied everything. He told investigators he loved her, that he cared for her and could never harm her. In court, his defense painted him not as a killer, but as a lonely, eccentric man. They admitted Maribel died in the apartment, but claimed Casey had only panicked, disposing of the body in fear. They suggested her past military service had left her with PTSD, paranoia, and a risky lifestyle that could have led to her death by other means. They questioned her drinking, her parties, even hinting at self-harm. But the prosecution saw something else: obsession, rejection, and a life crumbling into desperation. Casey had no job, no home, no friends, and when Maribel, the woman he had clung to, turned away from him, something inside him snapped. After weeks of testimony, as closing arguments ended, Casey spoke from jail, insisting he still missed Maribel more than anyone, but refusing to apologize for a crime he swore he didn't commit. The jury would now decide, was he a misunderstood outcast or a calculated murderer who silenced the only person left in his world? It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance for two people to rebuild their lives under the same roof. Maribel Ramos, an Iraq War veteran, a college student, and a woman who carried herself with the strength of a fighter, had opened her home to a friend who needed help. His name was Casey Joy, a man who had lost much of his own stability in life and seemed to find comfort in her presence. To the outside world, theirs looked like an arrangement built on friendship, respect, and trust. But behind closed doors, that trust would slowly begin to fracture, and it would end in one of the most haunting cases Southern California has ever seen. Maribel had faced battles most people could never imagine. She had served her country with pride, wearing her uniform with honor, but she also carried invisible scars. Friends described her as fearless and outspoken, yet full of warmth. She wanted nothing more than to finish school, build a career, and create the life she had always envisioned for herself. Casey Joy, on the other hand, seemed to drift from one hardship to another. He moved in with Maribel after losing his job, and though she treated him like family, tensions began to mount. What started as a gesture of kindness would become the very decision that placed her in the path of danger. In the weeks before her disappearance, Maribel made a series of chilling 911 calls. On the surface, they sounded like ordinary disputes between roommates, but her words carried fear. In one call, her voice shook as she told the dispatcher she wanted Casey out of her home. She said he was obsessed with her, that his behavior had grown controlling and unstable. To her, the apartment was no longer a safe place. To Casey, it was the only place he felt he had left. That toxic imbalance was about to reach its breaking point. On May 2, 2013, Maribel missed a class presentation, something completely out of character for a woman who was disciplined, determined, and never careless with her commitments. Her friends immediately raised alarms. They contacted police, who began a desperate search. Flyers went up, vigils were held, and the community rallied around her family. Her niece, Giselle, clung to hope, believing that Maribel's strength would carry her through. But with each passing day, hope dimmed. The investigation zeroed in on the one person who had lived with her, Casey Joy. Detectives began to piece together a disturbing timeline. Casey had scratches across his body. Prosecutors claimed they were the result of a violent struggle with Maribel. He insisted otherwise, saying they were just non-specific abrasions, the kind you could get from brushing against anything. But investigators weren't convinced. The real breakthrough came when detectives accessed public library computers, tracing Casey's internet history. There, they found searches that seemed to point directly to the remote area where Maribel's body was eventually discovered. It was chillingly precise. The prosecution argued it was no coincidence. He had scouted the location where he thought no one would ever find her. Still, this was no open and shut case. There was no DNA evidence linking Casey to the crime, no fingerprints, no clear cause of death. Even prosecutors admitted it was a case built almost entirely on circumstantial evidence. But piece by piece, like pencils bundled together, the circumstantial evidence grew stronger. Maribel's panicked phone call to police, Casey's growing fixation on her, his internet searches, his presence in her apartment, and the scratches on his skin. Alone, each piece might have been explainable. Together, they painted a devastating picture. When the trial began, Casey's defense argued that the state's case was riddled with holes, like Swiss cheese. They reminded the jury there was no hard forensic evidence, no eyewitness, nothing definitive. But the jury wasn't convinced. They listened to Maribel's final cries for help, they saw Casey's pattern of behavior, and they studied the search records. In the end, they found him guilty, not of first-degree murder, but of the lesser charge of second-degree murder. The courtroom was tense as the verdict was read. Maribel's family says, I, fighting back tears, felt a wave of relief mixed with sorrow. They had justice, but nothing could bring her back. Awaiting sentencing, Casey launched a relentless campaign from his jail cell. He wrote dozens of letters to the judge, insisting he was innocent. He gave interviews, including one where only audio was allowed, proclaiming he was set up. He said many people had access to the library computer, that he never searched for the canyon where Maribel's remains were found. He claimed his relationship with her was purely platonic, that she was like a sister, and that the idea of him killing her was unthinkable. To this day, he maintains his innocence. But the court was unmoved. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. For Maribel's family, the sentence was bittersweet. Her mother and sisters held each other in the courtroom, describing Casey as a coward, an evil man who had taken away someone irreplaceable. Her niece, Giselle, carried her aunt's photo proudly as she walked across the stage to accept Maribel's college degree on her behalf. It was a moment of triumph shadowed by grief, a reminder of a life cut short, just as it was beginning to flourish again. Casey's attempts for a new trial were denied. His parole hearings in 2022 and again in 2023 were also denied. He will not be eligible again until 2026. Behind bars, he continues to write, even working on a book he calls Suspect, Guilty Until Proven Innocent. Whether the world ever reads it or not, the fact remains, Maribel Ramos is gone, and her family is left to carry her memory forward. The case remains a haunting example of how trust can be betrayed in the most unthinkable way. A woman who had served her country with bravery, who had given her time and her heart to friends and family, was taken in the very place she should have been safe, her own home. For many, the unanswered questions linger. Could more evidence have been uncovered? Was justice truly served? Or was this yet another case where the truth may never be fully known? What cannot be questioned is the impact Maribel left behind. Her family remembers her as a role model, a second mother, a source of strength and laughter. Her friends remember a woman who was unafraid to fight for what she believed in. And her community remembers the way they came together, united in grief, to honor her life. Though the trial is over and Casey Joy remains behind bars, the story of Maribel Ramos continues to echo as both a warning and a remembrance. Because sometimes the greatest mysteries are not about how a life ends, but about why it had to end at all.